Vous souhaitez tous le bienvenu. There is interpretation in English and French if you have your headpiece. It's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Francis Gurry, Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization, who will make a few opening, very brief remarks, followed by Mr. Lapierre, Director General of INPI France. And then all of our distinguished guests are open to responding to your questions. Thank you very much. If I'd like you to identify yourself, please, before asking a question. Thank you very much. Mr. Gurry? Vous pouvez utiliser votre micro.
Merci, Sama, mesdames, messieurs. On vient de parler, donc je pense qu'on peut aller directement à vos questions et puis on peut essayer d'élaborer nos observations au cours des réponses à ces questions, à moins que Yves...
Effectivement, je pense que le mieux est d'aller aux questions. Et puis simplement un tout petit mot pour vous inviter à aller voir l'exposition, la vraie exposition qui parle du faux. Vous verrez, c'est passionnant et on apprend beaucoup de choses sur la contrefaçon, ses enjeux et ses risques.
Voilà, alors c'est moi.
J'aimerais juste dire aussi que nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir avec nous M. Bernard Brechon, qui est le président du Comité national anti-contrefaçon de la France, qui est aussi disponible pour répondre à vos questions ce matin. Je vous donne la parole. Oui, monsieur. In English?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Zaki Anastasiou. I'm from South Africa, Talk Radio 702. There's just a bit of a discrepancy in terms of the figures and what the actual cost is to the global economies. I've heard different numbers being and what counterfeiting and piracy is costing the world. And my second question is, I heard you touch on actually educating the consumers as to what to look out for and being aware of these things. Now, I come from a developing country in South Africa, and I have not seen one television advert, one piece in the media advertising and alerting a consumer out there what is a counterfeit medicine and what is not. And I draw reference to the number that was bandied around, about 700,000 people that were killed last year. Is that a confirmed statistic from the World Health Organization as a result of using counterfeit medicines?
Let me, if I may, start on the first question, and then I'm going to hand over to, I think, Jean-Guy probably has some information on the latter. On the first question, various studies have been done. The OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, has done a series of studies, first of all, on the impact of counterfeiting on physical goods in international trade. They came to an estimate of around about 200 billion in international trade, and then on digital, the impact of piracy of digital goods. Those studies are the subject of a certain amount of controversy. As a result of that, we are looking at improving our methodologies. And for example, at the World Intellectual Property Organization, our chief economist is undertaking for our advisory committee on enforcement a study on improving the methodology for measuring the size of the problem. But what I would like to say to you about this question is let us by all means improve the methodology, and as President Clinton said at Davos recently, it's very good to have policy debates that are not fact-free. There are too many fact-free policy debates. And let us by all means improve our methodology, but we know there is a problem, it is international, and its dimensions are enormous. There is rarely a city you go to that you don't encounter on an anecdotal level this problem. So we have plenty of evidence to suggest that it is a major problem that we are dealing with here. And as far as the digital piracy is concerned, well, if you take the recording industry's figures from 2 years ago, 40 billion files of music were illegally downloaded, 95% piracy rate for online music. That was what the International Federation of Phonogram Producers came out with some 2 years ago. But as I say, we do need to improve the methodology. We do know, however, that the problem is far too big and complex to be ignored. Let me hand over, if I may, to Jean-Guy.
Yes. Just on the numbers, I think to repeat some extent what's been said, we're all trying to delineate the magnitude of this problem. There are many credible sources. The OECD has been a leader in defining some of these and setting, if you want, some upper estimates of the impact in different areas, not only, for instance, in terms of the total cost to the world economy or national economies, but looking at, for instance, the last estimate of the OECD, that this sort of criminal activity leads to losses of about 2.5 million jobs in G20 countries per year. So there are many numbers. I think for us, they have to be obviously based on some sound methodology and a credible source, objective source in terms of supporting them. But I think what we have put forward in terms of our estimate, which is the ICC and BASCAP estimate, is contained in this most recent report, which in fact is being released here at the Congress. It's available at the BASCAP kiosk, and it is called Estimating the Global Economic and Social Impacts of Counterfeiting and Piracy. So we've worked with a research organization. It has used statistics from different sources, OECD and others, and come up with what we, again, think is a sound picture, if you want, of the impact of this kind of activity. On your last question, I think, as has been said, this is a global problem. It isn't the problem that is simply afflicting or more significantly afflicting developing countries rather than developed countries. It's not a north-south problem. But the simple reality is that the enforcement, detection, and other measures to control the use of and limit the use of counterfeit products is simply less present and less impressive in developing countries. And the number I cited is simply because I think we hear a plethora of numbers, statistics about economic impacts and all the rest of it. It becomes a little difficult for us to grasp what it really means to individuals. And I was just citing one which struck me when I look at various WHO studies that were done by others in partnership with WHO. I mean, I'll give you the specific reference. It was the International Policy Network. It was a study done in 2009. It's called Keep It Real. It's available on the internet. Again, it is, to our mind, a sound study. And it looked at simply the impacts of counterfeit medications only on in the areas of malaria and tuberculosis, and said that just the fake products, the fake medications that are available to treat those two diseases result in their estimate at deaths of about 700,000 per year. Now we're not differentiating north and south, but again, I think we can all guess that the most vulnerable populations, especially malaria and tuberculosis, both are going to be in some parts of the world rather than others.
I would like to answer to you about, you are from South Africa, I understand that, and about advertising. It is true that there is very few countries which have, the courage to make advertising and make, this kind of information. In France, with the help of the Association of the Producer, we have done, every year we've done a campaign. We've done a campaign on the net or even on the TV. And the French state, has spent 5 million, euro during the last 3 years to make this kind of campaign. Because I agree completely with you. It's only with the consumer at the end to fight against counterfeit product is the consumer, the latest help that we can have. And therefore, we should inform them. We should tell them what is happening. And it is true it's not easy. Because when you do, for instance, a video on the spare part of cars, immediately the people who are, you know, the big brand of cars says, it's not me, why you do say that? And, you know, there's also a counterpart, you know, which is quite maybe serious. So it's very difficult. But we know that in France and in Italy, we are sharing, you know, and what we hope really is that to make a real campaign toward the consumer all over Europe. And therefore, this year we will develop again on, you know, on the net, you know, this kind of campaign, which is a campaign explaining what is exactly this terrible thing that it is. And it is true that it is difficult to give figures because they are not reliable. But in the same time, you know, we have the possibility at least to say that counterfeit product could, you know, stop, for instance, jobs, kill jobs, which are some things that we know. And, you know, when a consumer know that, maybe we think a little bit about the fact that every time he buy, consequence, which is the money is going to the mafia, the jobs are disappearing. And so we have to have the courage to say that, because we have some proof to have that it is that the real you know, movement of the money. So I think we will try again to come back. We have made, you know, in 2009 a campaign. We will do a campaign in 2011. But in the same time, you know, we have to have the approval of the producer, the approval of, you know, our state, and we will try to develop that. But I think it's so important that you're right, that at the end, you know, the consumer will be the judge about and to stop this kind of failure. Thank you very much for your remark.
Thank you. Just to point out, the next session in this room will be about the question of measurement. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, hi, I'm Catherine Sayes from Intellectual Property Watch. I would like to know if the new training program for custom officers and increased knowledge would prevent some case of alleged detainment of generic medicines at the borders, since it is a worry from some countries.
Thank you for your question. Our training, especially at the national level, is based on the demands of each nation. So when there are specific needs, usually we provide training in response to that specific needs. And our method is, it is more on risk analysis, what kind of risk indicators are there and how you can identify authentic and fake. That kind of training, plus how to cope with the business, because business has the more information. So how to work together with the business. That is the major part of our training.
Bonjour, Alain Establier, Security Defense. Permettez-moi de poser la question en français, si vous voulez bien.
Nous sommes en France.
Et vous pourrez répondre en anglais. Depuis ce matin, on a entendu beaucoup parler de chiffres, de produits, de risques, de contrefaçon, etc., de clients, de consommateurs. Est-ce que vous pensez, dans le cadre de ces 2 jours, aborder la problématique qui est que beaucoup des contrefaçons sont des contrefaçons soit d'État, soit avec la complicité des États ou de certains États. Je ne les citerai pas, mais je pense qu'on a des exemples. Est-ce que vous pensez ne parler que de combattre la contrefaçon au bout de l'échelle et non pas au niveau des causes, ou du moins des départs? C'est ma question.
Je pense que vous relevez la complexité du problème, n'est-ce pas? C'est un problème qui exige donc une coopération publique et une coopération privée. Donc, votre question, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? par rapport au alors là, je pense qu'il y a bien sûr des obligations qui existent déjà dans les accords multilatéraux. Ce n'est pas un secret que, en général, la communauté internationale n'est pas bonne à la mise en œuvre des obligations. Si on regarde la période de coopération internationale pour les derniers 60 ans, on voit une bibliothèque qui a été construite de lois, de traités, mais très, très peu d'instances de coopération sur la mise en œuvre. Il y a très peu d'instances. Donc ça, c'est, je pense, ce cas est un cas exemplaire du défi que la communauté internationale a d'aller au-delà de simplement légiférer et de mettre en œuvre une espèce de surveillance ou du respect des droits. Et c'est une très, très grande étape parce que personne ne le veut. Aucun État veut franchir cette étape pour le moment. Mais sans cela, il est difficile de voir comment on va vraiment s'adresser à cette question. Il faut qu'on commence à développer les moyens pour une coopération.
Okay. The question is whether or not this conference is going to broach the subject of whether this is a problem of countries or states as opposed to groups and individuals. From Interpol's perspective, it's a problem of organized criminal groups, transnational organized criminal groups, individuals. You can read about countries that are attacked publicly time and time again for being supporters of counterfeiting. And in these countries, in all countries, Interpol's found that when you go there with a good plan, you don't have a bias in terms of who's responsible, who's not responsible. You want to find out how to investigate and prosecute people who are engaged in counterfeiting, medical products, whatever it might be. We've had great success. So from Interpol's perspective, I think there's better value to talk about organized groups, individuals, than to have this forum become a forum where certain countries attack other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry for responding in English language, but I just wanted to tackle one other issue you mentioned. So, for example, the International Trademark Association, as an association for brand owners and consumers as well, and brand representatives, is tackling this issue by extending its reach out to the world and establishing offices in other regions to create this kind of awareness. But you especially mentioned that might be a problem of states and or countries. So we think that in these countries, which we don't mention by name, there might be still a problem. We are aware of this, but these are also the countries where there is an emerging industry. And this industry will face the same problems which our industry from the developed countries is facing right now. So they will address their own governments to give them this respective support. And I think this will help develop the idea of respecting intellectual property worldwide.
I think we have time for a couple of more questions. Yes.
Hello, I'm Manoj from India, representing Best Trust of India News Agency. So I have three. Are you able to hear now? Yeah, I'm Manoj from India, representing the news agency PTI. So I have a few questions. The first one is for Mr. Nobel. So you were just talking about the Intellectual Property College. So can you just provide some more details about it? And secondly, I just went through this opening session. So in a developing country like in the case of India and all, there is always an issue of cost factor. If we go for the original products, it costs a fortune, mostly. So has there been any attempt to address that part of the issue in terms of cost factor in developing countries? In many people might not be able to afford the original things. So that might also increase piracy. And thirdly...
My brother. One question, maybe two parts, three questions,
Cool.
No. Okay. So let me just try the first question, or the first part of the question. The purpose of this college is to give investigators in the intellectual property crime area ways to learn at their own speed in many languages online around the world. It's going to be launched tomorrow. We have a booth set up here where you can get more information. It'll be also accessible on our website, and perhaps after this this session, I can give you one of my colleagues' name, and you can ask them 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 questions. On the other question, I would ask my colleagues here who are much more expert in the deterrence aspect of it in terms of cost versus resources.
Let me make one comment then, if I may, about cost. Yes, there are discussions that have been going on, and there are practices in place on, for example, tier pricing. Okay, so having different tiers or layers of pricing applying to the same goods or services in different parts of the world to accommodate the different purchasing powers that exist in those different parts of the world. So that is certainly something that business in its own interests is looking at all around the world. There's no legislation on it, there's no requirement on it. I would simply note that it is, of course, it is a development which goes against the grain of internationalization and globalization. So in a world in which markets are becoming more global, to divide them up in order to implement a policy of tiered pricing is also a practically difficult thing to do. So one of the concerns one of the concerns of business in relation to tier pricing is the possibility of the same products coming back into the markets, being sold at a lower price and coming back into the higher priced markets.
I would just add from the business perspective that pharmaceutical companies, others involved in that field, have been engaged in the discussions with the WTO or through the WTO on the TRIPS agreement, for instance, over the last several years in terms of reducing the price of some essential medicines for developing countries. And this has been successful. There have been essentially exceptions made to the intellectual property agreement, the TRIPS agreement of the WTO. And this has resulted in low-price medicines being more readily available in developing countries around the world. But it hasn't eradicated the negative effect of fake medications still competing even at low prices.
Do we have any more questions? We have just a couple of more minutes left.
Thanks. Hi, Trevor from World Trademark Review. It's just a very quick question with regards to something that was commented on earlier on, which was the recent tragic murder of a South African customs official. There's been calls online, and I'm thinking of sort of one particular petition, for an investigation run by the WCO or Interpol or help in terms of finding the actors behind the actual hit. I just wondered if any discussions have taken place around that.
I can't comment on ongoing criminal investigations at all, so it's easy for me to answer this question.
The same. The murdered officer was a police officer who has been working very closely with the customs. And well, this is a very unfortunate event, and that officer has received training from us, and well, in cooperation with Interpol and others. And it is really tragic, but then we'll see how the investigation will evolve. Thank you.
Rick Mitchell, BNA. You say counterfeiting's not a north-south problem. How about an east-west problem? The last conference I attended on this subject, there was a lot of talk about China, Southeast Asia. You're not mentioning any areas in particular today, but what are the big problem? What are the big problem countries? Can you name them? Or has China really changed its act in the last just 2 years, 1.5 years? Or is that still the big area? Thank you.
I just want to go on record again that I see little advantage to countries attacking other countries in this problem. I think it's a global problem. No region's exempt, no country's exempt. As far as China and the countries I mentioned from South and Central America, Interpol's cooperation with them has been great. And we found all countries where we go there with a comprehensive plan about why it's in the country's best interest to investigate and fight counterfeiting. We've had great success. I mentioned the initiatives we had in Africa and the initiatives we had in South America and Panama. So from Interpol's perspective, country bashing will bear little valuable fruit from our perspective.
I'll agree with Ron. I'll agree with Ron on this. You know, I think all of our organizations, and I think I'm pretty much able to make that comment, all of our organizations are very much involved in building the capacity to deal with the problem. And that in every country differs because the capacity levels are different and the problems in every country are different. We know the phenomenon affects all. You know, it affects all in different ways, depending on their level of development. That will also give us the level of vulnerability as well of a country. But we, I think, are looking to construct an international alliance that will deal with the problem. And in that process of constructing an international alliance to deal with the problem, I think Ron is absolutely right to single out any particular country publicly on the matter doesn't help us.
And from WCO point of view, I fully agree with two previous speakers. And I observe that there is increasing awareness at the country government level because in the end, when the economic development is there, well, internally, there is a problem. And then for the investment climate that all countries, governments are trying to improve, this could be very hurting issue. Therefore, I see that efforts, awareness raising was there, and we cooperate each other with other international organizations and business to try to help those countries.
The official timekeepers are telling us the time is officially up. I think we'll take one more question. This is such a rare opportunity to have these distinguished people here. Please.
Yeah, I've just got a question from an Interpol perspective in terms of the prosecutions that are taking place.
Could I just make a comment? Every